This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha, the channel that never uses AI computerized voices to read stories. I'm back at you this week with another great story, and you can see the title right on your screen. Man splits with wife of 39 years after learning his son isn't his. Now, I'm doing this story to really illustrate that female nature has never changed. It's been the same since the beginning of time. It is much worse now. It's much more prevalent now, especially due to movements like the FU Men movement, which I think has really done a lot to destroy Western civilization. But I don't want to get off on a tangent. Let's get into this story and see what it's all about. And this story is told by the son. So he's the one who actually made this post. And he starts out and he says, I don't know if this is the right place to post this, so let me know if it's not. This story is about my parents. My dad is 65 and my mom just turned 61. Married for 39 years with 3 kids, my sister 38, me 36, and my brother 33. We've always been a very close family and have remained that way even though we all live in different places now. The foundation and entire dynamic of our family was shattered earlier this year when we learned my mother cheated on my father 2 years into their marriage, and worst of all, that I was not my father's biological son. I still get emotional just saying that, even though it's been over 7 months since I first found out. Back in January, my wife and kids, sons ages 15 and 13 and daughter 10, and I thought it would be fun to map our family tree. So my wife ordered kits for us and for our parents. Everyone was really excited about this, especially our kids and our parents. Thinking back now, my mom was the most interested of all, as she was looking forward to seeing the data for her extended family. Knowing what was revealed, I don't know why she had such enthusiasm for this. I think at the time she really didn't understand how these tests work. I'm jumping ahead here, so let me back up a bit. We got the kits in mid-January and submitted our samples the following weekend. We collected everyone's samples when our parents were visiting us one Sunday. Anyway, we got the results back in late February, and my wife noticed right away something was off. While there was a clear connection to my mother, the report showed no connection between my father and me or with my father and any of my children. We thought this had to be a mistake, so she called the company to report the issue. While on the phone, the rep did a quick check and confirmed the results were from the package we submitted. Learning this, my wife put me on speaker. We told the rep there had to be a mistake and explained why. We asked if she could double check, and she said she would talk with her supervisor to see what else she could do and call us back. After we hung up, my wife jokingly told me, "It looks like you might be the bastard of your family." I laughed, but I asked my wife, what if it's true? I remember her telling me not to be silly, but I could tell she had some level of doubt like I did at that point. Later that afternoon, the rep called back and reconfirmed everything. She said she called the lab herself and the report was indeed correct. After getting off the phone with her, my wife and I sat there looking at each other with our mouths open as we were in shock. My emotions were all over the place and I started talking crazy. My wife settled me down and we talked about what to do next. We decided to not do anything immediately and to give it some thought, as only she and I knew about the results at that point. As a coincidence, or possibly an omen, at dinner that night, my daughter asked if we had gotten the test results back. I looked at my wife and she spoke up and told our kids that we did, but there was an error and they had to be rerun. Then later that same evening, while talking by phone with my parents, my mom asked me the same question. I told her the same thing we told our kids. The next few days were difficult, as I kept thinking about it constantly. In my mind, I wrestled with whether I should confront my mom and see what she says, or talk to my dad first and see how he wants to handle it. I even considered not telling anyone else, as I knew once I did, our lives would never be the same. Though that sounded great, it wasn't a viable option, as my family members were expecting the results and I couldn't live with that secret. I kept procrastinating, and each day I did, I became more and more on edge. My wife eventually convinced me to talk to my dad first and take it from there. She said it was the right thing to do, and I agreed. So that Sunday, we drove over to their house. I was really nervous and got so worked up I had to pull over after a few minutes, and my wife drove the rest of the way. When we got to their place, I was shaking with nerves. But as soon as I saw my dad, I became remarkably calm. After the four of us chatted a while, my wife took my mom to the farmer's market and then out to lunch, while Dad and I stayed back and continued talking. As soon as the ladies left and it was just me and Dad, I couldn't wait any longer, and I told him straight away. I said, "Dad, we got the results back from the genealogy company." He said, "That's great. Do you have them with you?" I told him no and explained there was a problem with the results that I needed to discuss with him. He looked at me with a blank expression. I explained the results showed no connection between he and I. He gave me a confused look and asked, "What do you mean?" I told him the results indicated we are not related. He chuckled a bit and said, "There has to be a mistake, right?" I told him that's what we thought too, but explained the results were confirmed by the lab. He asked if the tests were ever wrong, and I told him the company told us they were nearly 100% accurate. The look on his face I will never forget. I could tell he was starting to get choked up, and he stood up to break the moment. I went over and hugged him. He had tears welling up in his eyes, and seeing that, I just started crying, something I hadn't done in 25 years. After composing myself, I asked if he knew what this meant, and he said yes. He again hugged me and reassured me I was his son no matter what, and told me to stop crying before he started. I knew that's how he'd react, but it sure was a relief hearing him tell me that. He's always been my hero. He asked if Mom knew, and I told him no. I wanted to talk to him first and see how he wanted to handle it. He thanked me for doing that and said that meant a lot to him. We then discussed how and when we would go about confronting Mom when she returned. After that, I called my wife to let her know Dad knew and it was time to tell Mom. My wife asked if I wanted her to rush back, and I told her no, take your time and go to lunch as was planned, as I wanted to spend more time with Dad. While waiting, Dad and I continued talking and grabbed a quick sandwich from the kitchen, as we didn't have much of an appetite at that point. When my wife and mother returned, the three of us sat her down and I gave her the news. She acted like a deer in headlights and kept asking me what I was talking about. My wife and I explained it to her in detail, but she still claimed she didn't understand. She told us we were both crazy and were not making sense. After going round and round with her, insisting we were crazy, she finally said something along the lines of, "Well, if there isn't a match, you must have gotten switched in the hospital." My wife spoke up and told her that wasn't the case because the report showed a direct match between my mom and I. By this time, I think my mom realized she was backed into a corner and started to cry. See, she got pinned down and now she doesn't have anywhere to go. So what do? They turn on the waterworks. She got up and left the room, and my wife followed her. We could hear them talking, and several minutes later, my wife came back and told us Mom was still insisting there had to be a mistake. My dad then went in to talk to her, and we left them alone for a good hour and a half before I went in to check on them. When I did, I could tell the air was thick. Dad told me everything was okay and that he'd be out shortly to talk to me. When he came out, he told us that Mom admitted to having an affair around the time of my conception, but still insisted my dad was the biological father. Can you imagine that? Now, this woman, after 37 years, is confessing that she had this affair because she got busted through this testing, and she's still insisting that her husband was the biological father. Unbelievable. He said she also refused to give the man's name, saying it didn't matter and was so long ago. Hearing this, I started to get emotional again. Seeing my reaction, Dad grabbed me and pulled me in and gave me a bear hug. It was the kind of hug he used to give me when I was a kid, and it brought back a rush of old memories. Seeing us hugging made my wife cry, and he hugged her too. I was surprised at how well he was taking things, but I could tell he was really upset with Mom. The reason why your dad is reacting that way is because obviously he's a strong man. And a strong man, as I've said over and over, doesn't show emotion. He doesn't show that he's weak in any way. He's hugging you with that bear hug because he probably felt like, hey, he's going to get emotional too. So he's pulling you in to give you a hug to kind of break the moment. The same thing he did before when he stood up. He felt himself getting emotional. He didn't want to go there, so he stood up to break the moment. That's a sign of strength. My wife and I thought it would be best if we stayed the weekend with them. When I told Dad this, he insisted we go home as he wanted to talk with Mom privately. He reassured us everything would be all right and that he would call if he needed us. We left that evening, but I ended up calling him multiple times that night to check on things. The following morning we talked again and he told me Mom was still refusing to give the name of the guy and that he was no longer talking to her until she did. She already knows she's busted on this and she's been caught in this lie. Why is she refusing to give the name of the man? I mean, that is ridiculous. My wife brought up a good point, saying we needed to get that information for medical purposes. Dad said he already told her that, but she just wants everyone to forget it because it was meaningless and doesn't matter. See, this woman was hoping, of course, that this would never come out. But now that it has, she's hoping everybody would just rug sweep it because it happened all those years ago. No, it doesn't work like that. Dad told us he wanted to tell my siblings and wanted me to set up a teleconference. I set it up for later that morning and specified it was for adults only. So they thought we were planning something with the kids. When they learned the purpose of the call, they were as shocked and in disbelief as we all were. On the call, Dad reaffirmed his love for me and told them he was doing all right. After the call, each of us called Mom individually and asked her to be forthcoming if for no other reason than for the medical well-being of her grandchildren. To our dismay, she still refused. She said she was so sorry for what she had done and wanted us all just to forget it because it didn't matter. She said she had apologized to Dad 1,000 times since he found out and will apologize to him 1,000,000,000 times if necessary, but still refused to give him any details. Ma'am, you can apologize 1,000,000,000,000 times and it's not going to make any difference and it's not going to make it go away. The best thing you can do is to be truthful at this point. And even if you do tell the truth, I don't know if anybody's going to believe you because you've lied for all these years. Later that afternoon, my mom called my wife and said my dad got fed up with her and left the house and wasn't answering her calls. She said she was worried and wanted me to call him as she knew he would answer for me. While talking to my mom, my wife again pressured her about being forthcoming with information about her affair partner. While she didn't provide the man's name, she did disclose to my wife that the man was now deceased. She told her since he's no longer living, there was no need for anyone to know beyond us, and she asked that we not tell her grandchildren. Do you see what kind of narcissist this woman is? I mean, she's totally selfish, as you can see, and she doesn't want to look bad to her grandchildren. My wife explained to her that it didn't matter if he was deceased, as we needed the information to check for any hereditary conditions. Mom still refused and just became more upset the more my wife pressed her. I called and talked to Dad, and he told me he was fine. He said he just needed to get away from her to cool down a bit. Later that afternoon, my sister arranged a call for the three of us and Dad. On the call, she suggested we all get DNA tests to confirm my results and to make sure they belong to Dad too. I thought Dad would be upset about this, but he was all for it. So the following week, all of us had full DNA testing done through a national lab. The process was convenient as they have local labs close to where each of us live. Well, the dad was probably thinking, hey, are these other two kids mine as well? I don't blame them for wanting to get the whole family tested. We got the results back a week later, and they showed my sister and brother were indeed my dad's children, but I was not. While I was relieved to hear that, it did make me feel like an outcast, especially since the identity of my biological father was still unknown. Again, Dad reassured me and even cracked a joke, saying he wouldn't trade me for $1 million. 2 million maybe, but not for one. That's just his personality. He's just fun to be around. The day after we got the DNA test results, I called Dad and told him I was planning to drive over tomorrow morning and spend the weekend with him. He told me not to come as he was leaving in the morning for the Gulf Coast. He and Mom bought a place down there last year and planned eventually to sell their family home and move there. He retired 2 years ago after working nearly 44 years and drew his first Social Security payment in January, right before everything blew up. I asked if Mom knew he was leaving. He said yes, and she's really upset, but he doesn't care as he needs to get away from her to think about what he's going to do. I completely understood where he was coming from, but I felt really awful for both of them. He said he told Mom he wouldn't be speaking to her again until she gave him the name of the guy. He went on to tell me even if she does tell him, he doesn't know if he's going to stay with her. I was stunned by the sudden turn in his demeanor, as up to this point he had been handling things so calmly. He said after a week of her crying and apologizing, he hit a breaking point and had enough. Well, his tactic worked, as that night Mom broke down and told him everything. Now listen to this. She explained the guy she had the affair with owned the laundromat in the town where they rented their first apartment. She used to go there every week to wash clothes as they didn't have a washer and dryer. He was divorced and lived above the laundromat, and that's where the affair took place. She told Dad the reason she did it was she was feeling really bad about herself back then, and this older guy was giving her attention and saying all the right things. At the time, she was like 24, and the guy was in his late 30s with teenage kids. Mom swore they were together just a few times and that she broke it off with him. Does anybody believe that? She swears that since that time, she has never seen or heard from him again. Now, obviously, what I think happened here is this. This woman got married young. She had a child young. And, her husband was just starting out with his career. So they were probably, just making ends meet, living in a modest apartment, didn't even have a washer and dryer. She's probably thinking, this isn't what I signed up for. And then at this laundromat, she sees this business owner. He's a better catch potentially than my young husband who can hardly make ends meet. Let me try to monkey branch to him. And I think what happened, this is just what I'm thinking now, and I don't know if this is the case, is that she probably got pregnant, went to that guy, said, hey, I'm pregnant, and he probably said, have a nice life. I don't want any part of you. That's what I think happened here, but let me know if you feel the same. He goes on, he says she told Dad that 6 years ago she saw his obituary in the paper, and that's how she knew he passed away. She swears that's how she found out and told Dad she's never given him a second thought since the affair ended. You know that is total BS. She said while she took no pleasure in his death, now listen to this. This is how you can really tell she's a narcissist. She felt relieved reading his obituary, thinking the secret she bore for all those years died with him. But fate had other plans. Yes, the truth will always come back to bite you, so it's always best to be forthcoming. Even though Mom made the full confession, Dad left for Mississippi the following morning and has been living down there by himself for the past 4 months. Mom is a basket case and is lost without him as he's been the center of her world for over 40 years. Regardless of what she did way back then, I know she does love him more than anything in the world, and this is really destroying her. Well, she loves him now, but did she really truly love him if she was willing to cheat on him? She calls him every day and he talks to her, but he's told her he doesn't want to see her just yet. He's also told her he's not sure if he wants to stay married to her. However, he's told us kids he doesn't plan on divorcing at his age. I don't know about that, mister. You're only 65. I mean, you could live for another, what, 25 years, maybe 30 years, who knows? And you want to continue living with this woman that did this to you all those years ago and let you live with this lie? He said he just needs time and doesn't want to be around her now and may never want to again. While I am 100% on his side, I don't know how I feel about this. I know Dad will be okay on his own, but I don't think Mom will survive long term without him. She basically is all by herself back in our hometown and rarely leaves the house. She looks terrible and has lost a lot of weight. She said she'll do anything to make it up to my dad, but he just doesn't want anything to do with her. Can you blame him? Personally, I'm doing better, but I feel like I've got a cloud following me around. One of the toughest things I had to do was break the news to my kids. They were really upset about this, especially my oldest son, who was always so proud of being his pap's first grandchild. To reassure them everything was okay, I took my family down to Dad's place for a week-long vacation, and we had a blast. Since then, the kids have been fine, as they know he loves them just the same as he did before. I also recently made contact with my paternal siblings. My half-sister lives in Illinois, and my half-brother in Tennessee. They're both in their late 50s with grown kids and grandkids. They weren't surprised when I told them about the affair, as they shared with me they never had much of a relationship with their father. They were raised by their stepfather from a young age and consider him their real father. They did, however, provide me with valuable information about a potential health risk that runs in my bio dad's family. It's heart disease. My paternal brother had a heart attack at age 48. My bio father died of a heart attack at 68, and his father died of a heart attack at 42. Gee, thanks, Mom, he says. As I wrap things up, you may ask why I decided to post this. I did it to clear my mind and as a warning for people with children who are thinking of cheating on their spouses. Don't do it. The damage you cause will extend far beyond you and your lover and will impact your families for the rest of their lives. And that's the end of his story. And this guy doesn't have any updates, but we are going to take a look at some of the responses he got back from the community, because in those responses, he responds to a few people with some additional information which fills in a lot of the gaps. So let's take a look at those responses now. But before we do, I want to remind you, if you like what you've heard so far, hit that like button. That will help get this video moved up on the YouTube algorithm and get it seen by people all over the world. So let's now take a look at those responses. The first one's from a woman. She says, I know exactly how you feel, as something like this happened to me when I was 23. However, I found out due to a medical emergency and not a genealogy test. I stopped speaking to my mom for nearly 11 years before we reconciled last Christmas. After the discovery, my dad divorced her and moved closer to me and my family. My dad and I remain very close, and the absence of DNA has not impacted our relationship one bit. The next response is from a guy. He says, what is your relationship like with your mother now? If it were me, I'd have nothing to do with her after what she did. The OP responds and he says, I love and respect my mother because she's my mother, and I always will, but most of the admiration I had for her is gone. I'd categorize our relationship now as strained, and my feelings for her as being those of tolerance. The next response is from a woman. She says, how is your mom doing now? How is her relationship with you and your siblings? The OP responds, he says, she's not doing well as she misses my dad terribly and doesn't want to exist. That's another narcissist play, is making a statement like that. I know she's genuinely sorry and would take it all back if she could, but she can't. We love her, and we've all been spending time with her to ensure she's okay. See, again, she's using that ploy for sympathy to draw them all in. And of course, they're good kids, so, they don't want anything to happen to their mom, which I don't blame them. And they're spending a lot of time with her and probably pampering her. Those are the actions of a narcissist, because she wants all that attention and she wants everyone to feel sorry for her. He goes on, he says, I think the hardest part for her is that she's always been the person that made us all feel better. But for this, there's nothing she can do to fix what she's done, and the fact she caused it is destroying her inside. I'm hoping with time we can all get back to something close to where we were, but for now, there's a huge elephant in the room whenever she's around. Well, of course there is, because that's going to be the first thing you think of every time you see her from now until eternity. And the final response is from a guy. He says, I really feel for you and your kids. That has to be tough. Does anyone outside of your immediate family know about this? The OP responds, he says, yes, everyone in my hometown knows about it. Dad told his family and friends, and as a result, it has spread all over town. I was really upset when I first heard about this, but Dad told me having the truth out there is best for all of us, and now I think he may be right. There's nothing for me to hide if the truth is known. It just is tough when people bring it up to me. As for Mom, this has caused her great embarrassment, and she doesn't want to be seen around town. She does all her shopping online and goes out of town for groceries. She's also switched churches as she feels everyone was talking about her behind her back, including the preacher. See, the narcissist thinks that everybody in the world is thinking about them and looking at them. Meanwhile, people, yeah, they probably know about it and they probably think she's a terrible person, but they're not obsessing with her like she's thinking. Now listen to this. Dad told her she can come down to Mississippi and stay there, which got her excited until he explained if she does, he will go back to the family home as he's not ready to see her. The OP finishes up and he says, I'd like to see them work things out, but I don't know. So that's a sample of the responses he got back, and I can tell you that just about every single one of these responses were in favor of him and his dad and were really disparaging to his mother. Very surprising because, as you all know, on a lot of these stories, a lot of people sympathize with the cheater, but not in this case because it did so much damage to the family. And now I want to take a look at what I think are some of the morals of this story. Starting off with, female hypergamy exists at every age. However, it is most present in women under 30. Women under 30 are most vulnerable to this because I think as women get older, they get wiser and they learn how the world really works, and they're not as vulnerable to hypergamy, to falling to the whims of hypergamy. But young women are, because they're always going to be looking for who can best take care of them. And the next point, it's related to the first. It is a basic instinct for women to be drawn to the perceived strongest man, and there's not much you can do about that. It's instinctive in them. And when I say strongest man, I'm not necessarily saying the most physically strong, although that is a big attractor for women, as we all know. But it could be the man with the most financial resources. It could be the smartest man. It could be the man with the greatest social skills. Whoever is going to provide them what they perceive to be a better life, a better experience, is who they're going to be attracted to. Next point, and I've said this over and over, and many of you have said it in your comments. Paternity fraud is one of the cruelest and most selfish acts and should be criminalized. And I think it should be a felony, not a misdemeanor. Next, a marriage with infidelity can never be classified as being good or great. How many times do you hear people in these stories, when they make these postings, they'll say, oh, we had a great marriage. If you just carve out those 3 months she was cheating on me, or if you just carve out that one night stand she had while she was on a business trip. No, you don't have a good marriage. If someone has cheated on you, your marriage is not good. Your marriage is not great. That's just my opinion. You may feel differently. And finally, even though it may not be the best financially for the man, and let's face it, it never is, divorce may be the best option for his mental health in cases of infidelity. Now, I wanted to say is the best option for his mental health in cases of infidelity, but I put the word may out there because not all guys think like I do. So those are my thoughts, and now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story, and how do you think this guy is handling this situation? Would you stay married to her but living separately? Or would you just rug sweep this and say, hey, you know what? It happened 35, 36, 37 years ago. We've had a great life together. I'm just going to look past this. I'm getting old now and I want to live out my days with my wife. Or would you just divorce her? Let me know in the comments. I'm really interested in hearing from you, especially from the older guys who have been married for a while. How would you respond in a situation like this if you found this information out? And also be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. And I will talk to you on the next one.